In the following clip you're about to watch, we see a terrifying encounter that turns a completely mundane, everyday space into a nightmare. The guy filming is just making his way through a quiet, empty utility room. It seems like a completely normal, boring walk until the dead silence is suddenly broken by something you never want to hear when you think you're alone. And whatever makes that sound follows it up immediately with a massive, aggressive display of physical force right in front of him. Watch how fast his survival instincts kick in when he realizes what is standing in the aisle with him.
I know.
Moving a heavy, front-loading appliance door on its hinges requires a significant amount of physical strength. It's not something a draft or a slightly uneven floor is going to accomplish. But where this happens is actually the most interesting piece of the puzzle. In paranormal lore, utility rooms, basements, and laundry areas are notorious hotbeds for spiritual activity. Paranormal investigators widely believe that water is a massive conductor for spiritual energy. Entities naturally gravitate toward places with heavy plumbing, drainage, and large electrical appliances. Those elements combined create a massive, easily accessible pool of kinetic and electromagnetic energy for them to draw from in order to physically manifest. Whatever is sharing that room with him isn't just a weak, residual spirit. It has siphoned enough ambient energy from its environment to not only project its voice, but to physically interact with the real world. It wanted to stop him right in his tracks and show him exactly who was in control of that room. What do you think was sharing that room with him? I'll leave you to be the judge. In the next clip, we see exactly why exploring sealed-off, abandoned buildings at night is always a terrible idea. The guy filming is standing outside a completely deserted house, and you can immediately tell he already knows he shouldn't be there. He unlocks the door to go inside, but before he even crosses the threshold, he starts loudly praying. Whether he heard something moving around inside from the porch, or the energy of the place was just that overwhelmingly heavy, his instincts were screaming at him that the house wasn't actually empty, and he barely takes a few steps inside before he gets violent, physical confirmation. Keep your eyes locked on the dark doorway straight ahead of him.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yabba! Bismillah. Oh! Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yeah, Bismillah. Bismillah, Bismillah, Bismillah. The
sheer amount of physical force required to throw that bed to the floor like that is staggering, and you can clearly see what did it too. But the absolute scariest part of this video isn't the initial scare, it's the aftermath. When he finally gathers the courage to walk into that room to see what just threw the bed, it is completely, impossibly empty. There are no footsteps running away, no one hiding in the corner, just a wrecked room. In a lot of Middle Eastern and Islamic paranormal lore, abandoned spaces like this are heavily associated with the jinn. Unlike traditional ghosts, which are the spirits of deceased humans, jinn are considered an entirely different species of entities that live alongside us, often claiming empty, ruined houses as their own territory. When a human walks into their domain, they don't just give you a spooky, subtle haunting. They aggressively defend their ground to scare you out. Moving that fast, displaying that much physical power, and vanishing without a trace is a classic hallmark of a jinn telling you to get out of its house immediately. In this next clip, we dive into one of the most unsettling phenomena in the paranormal world. Children seeing things that adults completely miss. People don't just randomly film their family sleeping for no reason. This kind of terrifying incident had actually been happening for a while, which is exactly why the father finally decided to set up a night vision camera in their room to capture it. They are all fast asleep until the little girl suddenly wakes up in an absolute panic. Skeptics will immediately try to brush this off as just just a standard childhood nightmare, but her body language completely disproves that. When a kid wakes up from a bad dream, they usually just cry and bury their face in their parents' chests for comfort, because the scary thing was inside their head. But she doesn't do that. Her eyes are locked on a very specific physical spot in the room. She is actively tracking something. Watch what happens to her level of terror when her dad actually tries to walk into the dark to check it out. In the paranormal community, it is a widely accepted theory that young children possess a much broader sensory frequency than adults, because their minds haven't been conditioned to logically filter out the impossible yet. They are highly sensitive to spiritual entities and energy shifts that we are completely blind to. The most chilling part of this footage is her reaction when her father steps toward the area she's staring at. She starts screaming purely because she doesn't want him going over there. She isn't remembering a scary dream. She is actively watching something standing in the dark, and she is genuinely terrified for her dad's safety. When a child reacts with that much intense protective panic to an empty space, you don't go investigate the dark. You just turn on every light in the house and maybe call for an exorcism. In the next clip, we are taking a look at a place that most people actively try to avoid, especially after dark: the basement of a funeral home. According to the caption, a worker was just heading down into the storage and receiving area for the bodies. This is the exact room where the recently deceased are first brought in off the street. Naturally, it's supposed to be the quietest, most completely still room in the entire building. But as he walks into the dark, the dead silence is violently interrupted. Keep your eyes on the heavy metal equipment standing right in the middle of the room.
Estamos aquí en la funeraria, otra vez, con ruidos raros. Entonces, pues, está solo. Ahora sí, cuál pinche que se ve, que nada. Estoy solo a la chingada. Estoy solo. A la chingada. A la chingada. No mames. A la chingada.
It takes a very deliberate, aggressive amount of physical force to knock heavy funeral stands straight to the floor like that. That isn't a draft from an AC vent, and it isn't a clumsy bump. That is a targeted, violent push. When you dive into paranormal theory, funeral homes are basically considered massive spiritual transit stations. They are the ultimate liminal space between the physical world and whatever comes next. Because of that, investigators believe these buildings are constantly flooded with the confused, restless energy of spirits who might not even realize they have passed away yet. However, a sudden, violent display of kinetic energy usually points to something much heavier than just a confused ghost. Throwing heavy objects is often a sign of immense frustration from a trapped spirit. Even worse, it could be a darker, parasitic entity that actively feeds on the intense residual grief and heavy atmosphere of the morgue, lashing out at the lone worker just to prove that it is the one truly in charge of the basement. This next clip shows one of the most violent and chaotic examples of a spiritual home invasion you will ever come across. But to understand how scary this was for the poster, we need to go back a few days. The guy who lives here experienced something on a day when he was actually miles away, out performing a show. In the middle of his set, he suddenly became violently ill. He felt shaky, weak, and described it as if his energy was being completely drained right out of his body. Trusting his gut that something was horribly wrong, he pulled out his phone to check his home security cameras. What he saw unfolding in his empty kitchen is absolute nightmare fuel. The cross on his wall was turned upside down. There was a scary sound coming from his kitchen, and chairs were being thrown around. Because of this, he decided to put more cameras around his house, and one day while he was sleeping, this happened. Pay close attention to the bedroom door and keep your eyes locked on the vintage items sitting on top of his dresser. Seeing a bedroom door slowly creak open on its own is creepy enough, but the movement on that dresser takes this to a whole new level of disturbing. That doll doesn't just fall over from a vibration, it is being actively dragged back and forth, left and right, exactly like unseen hands are physically playing with it. In paranormal research, vintage dolls are notorious for acting as spiritual sponges or trigger objects. Because they are designed in the likeness of humans, dark entities often use them as vessels or focal points to manipulate physical energy. What you are seeing here is a classic psychological intimidation tactic. The entity opened the bedroom door to physically demonstrate that it has free reign of his house, and it started toying with the doll to mock a childlike innocence while he is completely unconscious and defenseless. It is a terrifying physical reminder that when you are dealing with an attachment of this level, you are never truly alone, especially when you close your eyes. When people asked why he hasn't moved out yet, he revealed that he did just move into this place, and whatever this is, didn't come with the house, it is attached to him. It followed him from his previous place. What would you do if you were in his shoes? In the next clip, we look at why pulling an all-nighter at the office can sometimes be a terrifying idea. Corporate buildings are designed for daytime hustle, but when everyone goes home, the lights dim and the space empties out, the atmosphere completely changes. The guy in this security footage is working late and decides to catch a quick nap at his desk. But it becomes very clear, very quickly, that he isn't the only one clocking in for the graveyard shift. It starts with a few classic, unsettling disruptions designed to wake him up and get his attention. But watch how aggressively the energy shifts when he finally gets up to investigate. You can literally see his panic escalate in real time. It starts with the phantom phone call, a classic terrifying poltergeist tactic. In paranormal research, entities manipulating electronics like phones or radios is often seen as an attempt to bridge the frequency gap, or simply a deliberate way to demand your undivided attention. When he picks up and hears dead air, the entity immediately pivots to physical manipulation. Moving a heavy office chair on its wheels takes effort, but aggressively throwing that black chair completely to the floor is a massive display of kinetic power. In the paranormal field, office hauntings are actually highly documented. You see workspaces are constantly filled with high stress, anxiety, and intense, heavy emotions. Many investigators believe that dense, negative energy can pool in these areas over time, creating the perfect feeding ground for poltergeists or parasitic entities. Whatever was in that room was actively feeding off his rising fear, escalating its physical attacks step by step until he finally broke. Bolting out of that office as fast as humanly possible was absolutely the only correct move. This next clip was posted by a dad who was just standing in his kitchen, completely focused on feeding his baby. His back is turned to the rest of the room, leaving him completely blind to what is slowly unfolding right behind him. He actually had no idea the full extent of what happened until he went back and pulled this security footage later. Keep your eyes on the paper towel roll sitting by the sink and watch the upper cabinets.
Oh, fucking hell, what was that? What was that? I know. What was... That shit me up. Someone's falling over. I know.
Seeing an object physically lift off the counter and levitate before dropping is one of the most undeniable displays of poltergeist activity you can capture. It didn't just tip over from a passing breeze, it was actively picked up and dropped. In paranormal research, entities that pull these kinds of stunts are usually classified as attention-seeking. But what makes this specific encounter so chilling is the intelligence behind the timing. It deliberately manipulated the paper towels to create a noise, forcing him to turn around and look. His raw, startled reaction is the exact spike in emotional energy the entity was looking for. Once it had his attention and his adrenaline was peaking, it immediately popped open the upper cabinet to establish its presence in the room. Poltergeist activity is famously drawn to households with high ambient energy, and sometimes the bustling, chaotic energy of raising a child can inadvertently act as a battery for these entities. It didn't want to hurt them. It just wanted to make it very clear that it was standing right there in the kitchen with them.